Hi everyone! This morning I'm going to be talking about a very common condition, something so common that many people are like, oh yeah, this is just what I have. You know, my doctor mentioned that I have this, but they're rarely given answers as to what's causing it or solutions to not only address it in the immediate, but also prevent it in the future. And what I'm talking about is diverticulosis and diverticulitis. So because these can, and I'll explain what they are, what the difference is, and what both of them are, but because these are more common in people 40 or older, these are often found in colonoscopies. So when people go in to have a colonoscopy, their doctor may share that they found diverticulosis or diverticulitis. So, and like I said, it's almost so common that, people are kind of left with, well, I guess this just is something that happens with aging. And that's not really the case. So let's talk about what diverticulosis and diverticulitis is. Diverticulosis represents these outpouchings that can occur technically anywhere in the intestine, so small or large. However, they're far more common in the colon, which is why they're most commonly found in during colonoscopies. So normally the colon, you have kind of four parts to the colon. There's the ascending colon, the transverse colon, the descending colon, and then it goes into the rectum, distal colon and the rectum. And it should normally have a smooth looking texture. The colon in particular has rugae, so it's more rigid or kind of grooved, I should say. But otherwise it's a small looking texture, or smooth looking texture. And what happens with diverticulosis is these outpouchings occur in weak portions of the intestines. They're generally about the size of a marble. And it's like I said, it's kind of a weakened connective tissue that allows for this outpouching to occur. And that is what diverticulosis is, period. It's just the presence of these outpouchings. But what can happen with these outpouchings is, as you can imagine, food and bacteria are two main things, along with just waste. Food, bacteria, and waste can become stuck in those outpouchings. And especially when it becomes infected, then it becomes inflamed, and that is what diverticulitis is. So diverticulitis is when one of those outpouchings becomes inflamed and potentially infected. So what are some of the symptoms of diverticulitis? I'm going to spend most of my time talking about diverticulitis, though keep in mind, diverticulosis is just a much milder version of diverticulitis. So what are some of the symptoms? Some common symptoms are nausea, pain especially in the lower left side of the abdomen, but it can be in the right side too, but pain in the lower abdominal area, changes in bowel patterns. So we more commonly see constipation, though diarrhea can occur too. Sometimes it can be severe pain, especially when there's a flare. So diverticulitis, when there's an active infection and flare, it can be pretty severe pain that lasts for days. And this is generally what will bring people in to see the doctor. And the doctor, if you've had a colonoscopy and they found it before, they might just prescribe antibiotics thinking that's what's causing it. If not, they might order a colonoscopy there. But the most common solution is twofold. One, antibiotics, especially if it's diverticulitis, they'll give you antibiotics thinking because there's the high likelihood that it's infected. Second is dietary changes. So they'll usually advise, if it's diverticulitis, and especially during a flare, they'll usually advise to avoid foods with small particulates. So nuts and seeds, for example, corn, popcorn, certain types of grains like quinoa, different things that can get stuck in that outpouching. It's often advised to also follow kind of as soft and liquid and easily digestible diet as possible if it's a flare. So highly cooked vegetables, soups, broths, things along those lines. Fruit like bananas, things that are easy to digest and that won't potentially get stuck. To prevent it, it's advised to follow a lower fat, lower protein diet and higher fiber. So all of those things are fine, but I really want to spend time talking about what allows for this to happen in the first place. And with that, we have to look closer at the mechanisms of the large bowel, of the colon, especially the gut microbiome and digestion and absorption and food sensitivities. So as always, I feel like my typical conversation when we're talking about bowel health boils down to those three components. And that's because those are three, and especially when we tie in inflammation, those are the four pillars of intestinal health: the gut microbiome and or dysbiosis or infection, food sensitivities and diet, digestion and absorption, and I'm going to wrap stress into that also, and then inflammation. So in the colon, we have trillions of bacteria, trillions. They are so metabolically active. They help us with things like balancing our immune system, digesting certain foods and absorbing certain nutrients, particularly B vitamins and vitamin K. They help with assimilating and eliminating waste products. They help with peristalsis, that wave-like motion the intestines make. They help with a lot. And they're so metabolically active that researchers are referring to them as another organ system in some cases. So these microbes come in different size camps. We have the large camp the bacteria that we collectively refer to as probiotics. We have large camp bacteria. And I say large camp because we need them. We are very reliant on them. They're the most abundant and we need them. These can be found in the Bacteroidetes and Firmicutes phylum of bacteria, but then also, the more commonly heard of, so Lactobacillus, bifidobacteria, things along those lines. And then we also have smaller camp bacteria, and I'll say microbes in general, because we also have fungus and viruses and lots of different types of microbes that are actually commensal, which means that they're supposed to live in the intestines. They're normal. They're supposed to be there. But nonetheless, we have smaller camp microbes. And those refer to what we collectively refer to as opportunistic. So if you think of the gut microbiome like a city and the intestines like a city, in a city you have a lot of good citizens, right? You want a lot of different kinds of people, like doctors and lawyers and janitors and mechanics and teachers, right? That can fulfill all the different roles a city requires. And you want a lot of diversity and a healthy amount of bacteria. In a city, it's a healthy amount of people. Also in a city, you're always going to have criminals, right? And that's something that we can never avoid. We're never going to get rid of all of the criminals, but we rely on the good citizens and the police force to keep the criminal population in check so they don't just terrorize and run the city. Same concept applies here. So those opportunistic microbes, like I'm referring to, those would be the criminals in the sense that they're supposed to be there. They're a normal part of a healthy environment, but we rely on the good bacteria, those would be the good citizens, and the police force, which would be our immune system, to keep those levels in check. What opportunistic means is if for whatever reason we end up in a compromised state. So let's say we have food poisoning. We might go through a really stressful, like emotionally stressful event. We could take antibiotics that disrupts the healthy microbiome. Poor diet, for example. Any number of situations will affect our immune system and the healthy bacteria and allow, when that happens, these bad bacteria take advantage of that opportunity. And so they will start to degrade the integrity of our intestinal lining. They'll eat our nutrients and produce waste products, so we have more toxic overload in the intestines. They affect our immune system, meaning they create inflammation because our immune system's like, hey, these guys are running amok, we got to get on this. So that whole mechanism is why it's estimated about 80% of disease arises in the intestines, first and foremost, chronic illness. But nonetheless, to tie that back to diverticulitis, if that's happening in a chronic way, meaning a long period of time, I can't count the number of people, many people that I work with that have been struggling with bowel issues for years, decades sometimes. So we can appreciate that this can go on for a long time as we just try to do the best we can and manage the symptoms. But nonetheless, That, and then especially when you combine it with either food sensitivities or just poor diet, then that can pave the way for this inflammation. Inflammation and nutrient deficiencies weaken the integrity of the colon walls of the intestines, and that's what allows for that outpouching to happen. And then we already have the inflammation in place to allow to kind of pave the way for that outpouching, which is diverticulosis, to become inflamed, and that now we have diverticulitis. So, in other words, the approach that we take to this is very holistic. We got to look at the presence of certain types of nutrients. So, for example, vitamin C is really important in maintaining collagen, elastin, and connective tissue integrity. And that's really what's being compromised here, is the integrity of the connective tissue and of the membrane of the colon. So nutrients like vitamin C, we have to look at antioxidants that can help protect the inflammatory response. Good microbes, so eating fermented foods and probiotics in some cases, can help with the presence of, the balance of bacteria in the colon. And an anti-inflammatory diet that is rich in different types of fiber and healthy fats, moderate amounts of really high quality animal products, all of those things. And another, from a lifestyle perspective too, I cannot emphasize enough the importance of hydration, which is needed to draw water, enough water into the colon to keep the stool soft yet bulked and easy to pass, because dehydration causes obviously a dehydration of the stool also. And so now we have this hard pellety stool that's difficult to pass, causing straining, and that straining also puts a pressure on the colon walls, kind of paving the way for the diverticulosis to appear. So hydration is imperative, and exercise, any kind of movement, because movement actually facilitates that peristalsis motion of the intestines, which keeps the bowels moving consistently, moving freely. It's very important also for stress management, right? Exercise always helps with stress management. And so it helps with digestion from that perspective too. So to recap, I'm going to go through because I feel like I just kind of blended together like 8 different points all at once. So I'm going to recap what diverticulosis and litis are, what some of the common underlying causes are, and then what you can do about it. So talked about diverticulosis is the presence of these outpouchings, generally, roughly the size of a marble or so. But these pouches that form in anywhere in the intestines technically, but most commonly in the colon. So these outpouchings that form is diverticulosis. When those outpouchings become inflamed or infected, then it becomes diverticulitis. Some of the symptoms include gastrointestinal pain, most commonly in the lower left side of the colon, but it can be technically anywhere. But gastrointestinal pain, sometimes nausea, vomiting, there might be blood in the stool, changes in bowel patterns, so most commonly constipation, which can also be a predetermining factor, a risk factor for developing diverticulitis is constipation. But sometimes we'll see diarrhea also. And they're most commonly found in colonoscopies is how they're diagnosed. So that's what they are, what some of the symptoms are. Next, as far as underlying causes, we talked about the role of the gut microbiome and how imbalances within the gut microbiome can relate to, can cause, is called dysbiosis, and can cause GI infection, as well as inflammation and maldigestion. And just to clarify, because I kind of made that a confusing point there, infection is different from dysbiosis. So gastrointestinal dysbiosis refers to an imbalance of microbes that are all normal. They're supposed to be present in the GI tract. They're just in the wrong ratios and the wrong levels. Infection represents the presence of a microbe that is never supposed to be there, like a parasite or certain types of E. coli, for example. So 2 different things, but nonetheless, dysbiosis can pave the way to infection And dysbiosis in and of itself, so an imbalance of the bacteria, can also lead to inflammation of those diverticula. Okay, so we talked about that. We talked about diet, the importance of eating an anti-inflammatory, low glycemic, whole foods diet, especially one that emphasizes quality. So as much organic as possible, especially when we're looking at types of fat and animal products. So there's a huge difference in conventionally raised animals and grass-fed, grass-finished, wild-caught animals. They're like two different animals. So huge difference there. So quality, quality, quality. And then also testing for, and in some cases, evaluating for food sensitivities and removing food sensitivities. Gluten being a really big one, dairy being a really big one, corn, sugar, soy. These are some of the more common ones that I see. So this is, I'm all talking to how to prevent getting diverticulosis and litis. So we talked about anti-inflammatory diet, addressing gut health, so dysbiosis. There's actually a very comprehensive way by which we can do that. But nonetheless, starting with different kinds of probiotics, and in some cases doing an herbal antimicrobial regimen is huge. And then also, we talked about other ancillary factors, so like lifestyle factors. So nutrient status being really important. Vitamin C is really important for maintaining the integrity of the intestinal connective tissue. So these pouches form from weak intestine, right? Weak intestinal walls. And so if we can strengthen that through vitamin C, through collagen is a really big one. There's another one, colostrum is something I really like for helping the intestinal lining, protein in general. All of these things can help strengthen the intestinal lining. So certain nutrients are important. Probiotics also, if we're not looking at SIBO, if we're not concerned about SIBO, that's my only hesitation in just blanket recommending probiotics. But nonetheless, if we're not dealing with SIBO, then probiotics can be very helpful. And then in addition to those recommendations, there's also hydration, which is huge. Hydration helps with maintaining the smoothness and bulkness of the stool. And with hydration, you're aiming for half of your body weight in ounces of water each day. Okay, so 150-pound person, for example, you want to aim for 75 ounces of water each day at a minimum. So hydration is huge. And then also exercise, because exercise helps actually strengthen the gut-brain connection as well as stimulate peristalsis, which is that wave-like motion propelling food from one end down to the other. If you're in a diverticulitis flare, so you've already been diagnosed and now you're experiencing these symptoms, you know what it is, doctors will most likely recommend an antibiotic because of the chance of it getting infected if it's not already infected. And so do what your doctors recommend as far as that goes. And then also from a nutrition perspective, it's encouraged to have the very easily digestible, but also minimally processed foods. So things like, I think of vegetable soup, right? Cooked vegetable soup. Maybe with like some lentil noodles or chicken or something in there for protein and fiber. But cooked vegetable soup is great. Bone broth, steamed vegetables, fruits like bananas and these, seedless fruits, so softer fruits. Don't do the berries. Same thing with nuts and seeds, corn, popcorn, all of those things are advised to avoid anyways. Rice can sometimes be helpful because it's easier to digest. It's a softer form of grain. But nonetheless, really just looking at minimally processed whole foods and cooked very soft in broths. Okay. And that's for a flare that can help. And then also teas like ginger tea, lemon tea, dandelion teas, all different kinds of teas in general can be very soothing also. So that summarizes it. So I really wanted to make this video because, like I said, I hear about this very often. Doctor diagnosed me with diverticulitis. He said it's no big deal. Or diverticulosis. He said it's no big deal. And it is, it's not in the sense that it's not an emergency necessarily. Sometimes it can be that. It can become an emergency. But it's not, immediately life-threatening. But there's really no emphasis or information on how to prevent them and what the real underlying causal factors are. And so that's why I wanted to share this. Is there so much that you can do to either prevent them, or if you've already been diagnosed with diverticulosis or ileitis, what you can do to address it to heal long term. All right, so thank you everyone for attending. Hope this was helpful, and have a wonderful rest of your week.